I'm Major Vanna Cross, 33 years old, and I've spent over a decade in the U.S. Air Force, first as a flight surgeon in Kandahar, now stateside at Nellis Air Force Base. I've patched up soldiers under fire, held lives together with one working hand radio, and carried the weight that came after. For years, I gave everything to the mission: my time, my sleep, my sanity. But when my new commanding officer mocked my PTSD in front of an entire room, laughing like the word itself was a punchline, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been humiliated by someone who didn't understand what you've survived? Someone who mistook your scars for weakness? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being disrespected, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about reclaiming your worth and reminding people what real strength looks like. What happened after he opened my mission file might surprise you. I transferred to Nellis Air Force Base on a Tuesday in March. The desert air felt cleaner than I expected, less suffocating than the recycled atmosphere I'd been breathing for the last 8 months in medical hold. My new assignment was administrative, overseeing medical logistics and training documentation for the 99th Air Base Wing. It was the kind of position they give you when they're not sure what else to do with you, when your file says combat experienced, but your recent psych evals suggest you need distance from anything that bleeds. My new supervisor was Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hale. I'd read about him in the transition briefing: decorated, ambitious, and by all accounts effective. He ran the Medical Operations Support Division with what the outgoing officer described as high standards and clear expectations. That phrase should have been my first warning. In the military, when someone's leadership style requires that much diplomatic cushioning, you're usually dealing with something sharp underneath. I met him on my second day. His office was pristine in that aggressive way some officers maintain, like the cleanliness itself was a form of dominance. Every pen aligned, every photo frame positioned at exactly the same angle. He didn't stand when I entered, just gestured to the chair across from his desk while finishing an email. When he finally looked up, his eyes did that quick assessment thing, the kind that catalogs your ribbons, your bearing, your perceived usefulness in under 3 seconds. "Major Cross," he said, leaning back. "Flight surgeon, right? Saw some action downrange." "Yes, sir. Kandahar, attached to Echo Squadron." Good. We can use someone with field experience. Most of the staff here are straight from technical schools, never deployed. Sometimes I think they forget we're actually in the military." He smiled like we were sharing a private joke. "Anyway, you'll mostly be handling documentation review, some training oversight. Nothing too demanding. Should give you time to adjust." The pause before adjust carried weight. I recognized it, the careful verbal footwork of someone who'd been briefed about my medical file, but wasn't sure how to address it. I'd gotten used to that pause over the past year, the way people's voices shifted when they remembered what was written in my records. "I appreciate the opportunity, sir. Looking forward to contributing to the mission." He nodded, already looking back at his screen. "Great. Captain Lee will get you situated." Dismissed. I met Captain Mason Lee in the hallway, a thin, earnest officer who looked about 12, but turned out to be 29 and working on his master's degree. He walked me through the office layout, introduced me to the staff, explained the daily battle rhythm. Everyone was polite, professional. Normal. But I caught it in the break room that first week, Hale holding court with 3 junior officers, coffee in hand, voice just loud enough to carry. "I'm telling you, the problem with this generation is they want participation trophies for showing up. Back when I came in, you didn't get a medal for having feelings about your job." Someone laughed. Someone else made a non-committal noise. "I mean, I'm all for supporting our people," Hale continued, "but there's a difference between legitimate medical issues and just needing to toughen up, you know?" I didn't react. I'd learned that skill downrange, the ability to hear something, process it, and file it away without letting my face show the work. I poured my coffee, added creamer, walked out. Behind me, the conversation shifted to weekend plans. The first real incident happened 3 weeks in, during a routine morning meeting. Hale reviewed the week's leave requests, a standard administrative task he insisted on personally approving. He read through them quickly: dental appointments, family emergencies, the usual logistics of keeping a unit running. Then he paused. Major Cross, he said, not looking up from his tablet. You've got a request here for Thursday afternoon. Medical appointment, mental health follow-up. He tilted his head, making a show of reading more carefully. PTSD screening. That's interesting. The room went quiet in that specific way that means everyone's suddenly paying attention while pretending not to. I kept my expression neutral. Yes, sir. It's a standard follow-up appointment. Required quarterly for my status. Right. He set the tablet down, folded his hands. I'm just curious, PTSD from what exactly? Did the printer jam traumatize you? Someone forget to refill the coffee. 3 people laughed. Small laughs, the kind that are more about relieving tension than genuine amusement, but laughs nonetheless. Captain Lee looked at his notepad. Sergeant Dana Ruiz, the admin NCO who'd been friendly during my in-processing, smiled despite what looked like discomfort in her eyes. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make it noticeable, then pulled out my notebook and wrote the date and time. My pen made small scratching sounds in the quiet. Something you want to add, Major? Hale's voice had an edge now, the kind officers use when they think someone's being insubordinate through silence. No, sir. Just making a note for my records. Your records. He smiled. Well, request approved. Try not to let the filing cabinets trigger any flashbacks. More laughter this time, louder. The meeting continued. I finished my notes, contributed to the discussion when appropriate, and left when we were dismissed. My coffee sat on the table untouched and going cold. That night, I sat in my base housing unit and wrote an email to my former squadron commander. I didn't send it. I just needed to write the words down, see them on a screen, remind myself that there was a time when my judgment was trusted, when my presence in a room meant something other than an uncomfortable reminder of things people would rather not think about. The next morning, I arrived early. Hale was already there, which surprised me. He usually rolled in around 0800, making a point of his late arrival as some kind of leadership flex. He was in his office with the door open, typing aggressively. Morning, sir, I said, passing by. He grunted without looking up. The day proceeded normally until the afternoon debrief. We gathered in the conference room, 10 officers and senior enlisted, reviewing training metrics and upcoming inspections. Hale stood at the front, working through slides, and then shifted into what he called his motivation moment. This was apparently a regular feature of his meetings, informal talks meant to inspire excellence and commitment. I want to talk about resilience, he began, pacing at the front of the room. About what it means to be truly mission-ready, not just physically but mentally. I felt several people glance at me. I kept my eyes on my notepad. Some of us come from operational backgrounds, Hale continued. Some of us have seen real challenges, real pressure. And some of us. He paused, and I knew what was coming. Some of us think that working in an office environment is somehow comparable to actual hardship. He softened his voice, made it mockingly gentle. We need to remember this isn't a daycare. This isn't a place where we need emotional support and safe spaces every time someone sends a strongly worded email. A few uncomfortable laughs. Captain Lee was staring at the table. Sergeant Ruiz had her arms crossed. I'm not saying we shouldn't support each other, Hale said, his normal voice returning. I'm saying we need to maintain perspective. Real trauma is being shot at. Real stress is life or death. Everything else. He shrugged. That's just Tuesday. I closed my notebook carefully, stood, and saluted. Request permission to be dismissed, sir. I have documentation to complete for tomorrow's training review. He looked surprised, probably expected me to sit through the rest of his performance. Yes. Dismissed. I walked out. Behind me, the meeting continued, but the energy had shifted. I could feel it, the way you feel weather changing. That evening, I processed my regular end-of-week administrative tasks. One of them was a routine clearance authorization. Hale had requested temporary access to Joint Operation Archives for an upcoming inspection. It was standard, the kind of thing I signed off on a dozen times a week. Different departments needed different access levels for different reasons. I verified his credentials, confirmed his authorization scope, and digitally approved the request. I didn't think much about it. I didn't need to. The system was designed to be routine, bureaucratic, boring. Just another Tuesday in the administrative machinery of the United States Air Force. I went home, heated up leftover chicken, and watched old episodes of a cooking show until I could sleep. Outside my window, the desert night was clear and cold, and somewhere in the distance, aircraft were running nighttime training exercises. The sound used to bother me. Now it was just white noise, no different than traffic or air conditioning. Just another sound in a life that had become very quiet, very small, and very far from the things I used to do. The pattern continued. Hale's comments became more frequent, more pointed. He'd make jokes about desk warriors during morning meetings, talk about how real operators didn't need mental health days, reference my leave requests with exaggerated concern. The staff's reactions varied, some laughed along, some looked uncomfortable, most just tried to stay out of it. I documented everything. Dates, times, witnesses, exact quotes when possible. Old habits from investigation training. I didn't know if I'd ever use it, but the act of recording created distance, turned personal attacks into data points. Captain Lee started checking in with me, casual conversations by the coffee maker or in the parking lot. He never directly addressed what was happening, but his presence felt intentional, supportive in that careful way junior officers have when they disagree with senior leadership but can't say so out loud. "How are you settling in?" he'd ask. "Everything okay with your caseload?" "Fine, sir. All current." "Good, good. Let me know if you need anything." I appreciated it, the gesture if not the limitations of what he could actually do. In the military, rank and authority create clear boundaries. He was an 03, I was an 04, Hale was an 05. The mathematics of intervention were complicated. 3 weeks after the conference room incident, I was working late, reviewing training documentation in my office. Most of the building was empty, just night shift security and a few administrative staff finishing reports. My desk lamp created a small island of light in the larger darkness. My computer pinged an automated notification from the archives access system. Someone had triggered a review alert on my file, accessing classified sections that required secondary authentication. The timestamp showed it happening in real time at 2,247 hours. The user ID was Hale's. I sat back, understanding settling over me like cold water. He'd gone looking. Curiosity, or maybe something darker, the need to find justification for his mockery, proof that my trauma wasn't real or substantial enough to warrant accommodation. People did that sometimes, went searching for evidence that would confirm their existing beliefs, let them feel righteous in their cruelty. The system showed which files he'd accessed. First, my service record, deployments, commendations, the basic outline of my career. Then medical documentation, though those sections would be heavily redacted for his clearance level. Then operational reports from Kandahar, from Echo Squadron, from March 2023. Then he'd open the mission file for Operation Copper Shield. The extraction that went wrong. The file that contained not just after-action reports and casualty lists, but also body cam footage, drone surveillance, radio transcripts. Everything that proved exactly what happened, in detail that no summary could capture. The file that showed what PTSD actually looked like when it was being created, in real time, at 1,500 meters elevation in Kandahar province on a day when everything that could go wrong did. He'd been in that file for 43 minutes. Then the connection terminated. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a while, listening to the building's HVAC system and distant footsteps in the hallway. I thought about Kandahar, about the things Hale had just seen that I lived with every day. I thought about whether this would change anything, whether knowledge created compassion or just discomfort. Mostly I thought about how tired I was. Not physically, that kind of tired I could manage. But tired of explaining, tired of proving, tired of the constant low-level battle of existing in spaces where your trauma was treated like an inconvenience rather than a consequence of service. I packed up my things, locked my office, and drove home through empty streets. The next day would come whether I was ready or not. That was something I'd learned downrange that still applied here. Time doesn't stop for your feelings about it. You just keep moving, keep breathing, keep showing up. The mission continues, even when you wish it wouldn't. The next morning, Hale didn't come in. His office stayed dark, door closed. Captain Lee mentioned during the morning brief that the colonel had called in some kind of personal matter, would be working remotely. Lee delivered this information carefully, not quite meeting anyone's eyes, and I wondered what he knew or suspected. The day felt different without Hale's presence. The office ran smoother, quieter. People spoke more freely, smiled more easily. It was like a weight had lifted, and I realized how much tension his leadership style created, how much energy everyone spent navigating around his moods and judgment. I worked through my task list methodically. Training documentation, supply requests, personnel reviews. The mechanical repetition was soothing, required just enough focus to keep darker thoughts at bay, but not so much that I couldn't maintain it for hours. This was why administrative work suited me now. It was controllable, predictable, safe. Sergeant Ruiz stopped by my office around 1,400 hours with a file that needed my signature. She set it on my desk, then hesitated in the doorway. "Major, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Sergeant." She looked uncomfortable, choosing her words carefully. "That thing Colonel Hale said in the meeting last week. About daycare and support. I just want you to know I laughed, and I shouldn't have. It wasn't funny, and I knew it wasn't funny when I did it. She trailed off, then forced herself to continue. "I'm sorry. That was wrong." I studied her for a moment, young, maybe 26, earnest in that way people are when they're trying to figure out how to be better than they were 5 minutes ago. "I appreciate you saying that, Sergeant." "I looked up Echo Squadron," she said quietly. "After that meeting. I didn't know, I didn't realize." She stopped, regrouped. "You don't owe anyone your story. But I'm sorry I made you feel like you did." "Thank you. I meant it." She nodded and left, and I sat there thinking about courage. It takes a certain kind of bravery to face a superior officer, even a junior one, and admit you were wrong. The military doesn't always make space for that kind of honesty. Hierarchy can be a shield for bad behavior, a reason to stay silent and complicit. But it can also be a structure for accountability when people choose to use it that way. Hale returned the next day. He looked tired, older somehow, like he'd aged several months overnight. He arrived late, went directly to his office, and closed the door. No morning walkthrough, no jokes in the break room, no impromptu leadership speeches. Just silence from behind that closed door. Rumors circulated. Someone said he'd been sick. Someone else claimed family emergency. Captain Lee, who probably actually knew, said nothing. I watched it all with the detached interest of someone observing weather patterns. This wasn't my drama to manage or resolve. I just needed to do my job, maintain my professionalism, and get through each day without adding new weight to what I already carried. Around 1,600 hours, my desk phone rang. Hale's extension. "Major Cross, could you come to my office, please?" His voice sounded different, smaller, less certain. I saved my work and walked down the hallway. His door was open now, an invitation or maybe a white flag. I knocked on the frame. "Come in." Closed the door. I did, then stood at attention. Old habits. "Sit down," he said, and it wasn't an order, more like a request. I sat. He didn't speak immediately, just looked at his desk like the words he needed might be written there. His office was still immaculate, but something about it felt different, maybe just that his presence seemed diminished, less commanding of the space. "I accessed your file," he finally said. "The operational archive. I know I had authorized access, but I want you to know I wasn't looking to weaponize anything or build a case. I was just..." He stopped, started over. "I was curious. I wanted to understand what you'd actually experienced. I thought maybe it would help me lead better, knowing what you'd been through." I waited. He wasn't done. "I saw the bodycam footage," he continued, quieter now. "From the Black Hawk. I saw the after-action report, the casualty list, the medical interventions you performed under fire. I saw." He looked up at me finally. "I saw what PTSD actually means. Not just the definition, not just the diagnosis. I saw what creates it." "Sir, let me finish." He held up a hand. I've been in the Air Force for 17 years. I've deployed, I've led troops, I've made decisions under pressure. But I've never experienced combat like that. I've never had to. He struggled for words. I've never had to hold someone together, literally, while taking fire. I've never had to make the choices you made. The silence stretched between us. Outside his window, I could see aircraft on the flight line, maintenance crews working in the afternoon sun. Normal operations continuing, indifferent to the small human reckonings happening in offices and conference rooms. I don't tell you this to excuse my behavior, Hale continued. What I said in those meetings, the way I treated you, it was wrong. It was cruel. It was the kind of leadership failure I used to pride myself on never committing. He laughed, bitter. Turns out self-awareness isn't my strong suit. Sir, with respect, I know what you're going to say. That I don't need to apologize, that you're fine, that we can just move forward professionally. And maybe we can. But I need to say this anyway. He looked directly at me now. I'm sorry. Genuinely. Not because I got caught or because I feel embarrassed, but because I hurt someone who deserved better, someone who'd already sacrificed more than I probably ever will. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. I absorbed this carefully, looking for manipulation or performance. But his eyes were clear, his voice steady. He meant it, or at least believed he meant it, which was sometimes the same thing. I appreciate the apology, sir. There's something else. He pulled out a form from his desk drawer. I'm recommending you for reassignment to the Air Education and Training Command, specifically to the Combat Medic Training Division at Fort Sam Houston. They need senior medical officers with operational experience to mentor the next generation of field medics. It's a promotion-enhancing position, and frankly, it's where your expertise would be better utilized than here. I took the form, read it quickly. It was exactly what he described, a lateral move that was actually an advancement, better for my career and probably better for my mental health. Away from Hale, away from this office, away from the daily reminder that some people would never understand. This isn't me trying to get rid of you, he added quickly. If you want to stay, your position here is secure. This is just, I saw in your file that you'd mentioned interest in training commands during your last career review. I thought this might be what you wanted. He'd done his homework. The reassignment matched goals I'd documented 6 months ago, before I even arrived at Nellis. It was thoughtful in a way that made his previous behavior even more inexplicable. He was capable of this kind of attention and care, which meant he'd chosen not to extend it before. I'll consider it, sir. Thank you. Take your time. The position won't be filled for another month. He paused. For what it's worth, I hope you accept it. Not because I don't want you here, but because I think you'd be exceptional at it. Those young medics need someone who's been there, who understands what they'll face. They need someone like you. I stood, preparing to leave, then decided to say something I'd been holding. Sir, the footage you saw, that was the worst day of my career. Maybe the worst day of my life. But it wasn't the worst day because of what happened in combat. It was the worst day because I lost people I was responsible for, people who trusted me to keep them alive. The PTSD isn't about being scared. It's about failing and carrying that failure every single day afterward. Hale didn't look away. You didn't fail, Major. You saved 2 lives under impossible circumstances. I know what the reports say, but I also know what I live with. I picked up the reassignment form. I'll let you know about this within the week. That's all I ask. I left his office and walked back to my desk. The form sat in front of me, an unexpected door opening onto something new. Around me, the office continued its routine, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the low hum of military bureaucracy processing itself. Captain Lee appeared at my door. Everything okay? Yeah. He apologized. Did you accept it? I thought about that. I acknowledged it. Acceptance is more complicated. Lee nodded like he understood. He's been different since yesterday. Quieter. Someone said they saw him sitting in his car in the parking lot for like an hour before he came in this morning, just staring at nothing. Knowledge can be heavy, I said. What will you do? I don't know yet. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. I already knew. I'd known the moment I saw the reassignment form, saw the door opening onto a future where I could turn my worst experiences into something protective, something that might keep other young medics from carrying the same weight I carried. I just needed a few days to sit with the decision, make sure it was mine and not just a reaction to Hale's guilt. Outside the window, the sun was beginning its descent toward the desert horizon. The quality of light changed this time of day, turned everything golden and soft, made even the harsh landscape look almost gentle. In a few hours it would be dark, and the night crews would take over, and the base would continue its endless cycle of operation and rest, war preparation and peacetime routine. I pulled out my laptop and started drafting my response to the reassignment offer. Not accepting yet, just thinking through it on paper, seeing how the words looked when I arranged them into possibility. The cursor blinked steadily, patient, waiting for me to decide who I wanted to be next. I submitted my acceptance of the reassignment on Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, the paperwork was already moving through channels faster than usual, probably because Hale was pushing it along as some kind of penance project. I didn't mind. The sooner I could start fresh somewhere else, the better. The remaining weeks at Nellis took on a strange quality. People treated me differently now, though I never learned exactly what they knew or how they'd learned it. Maybe Sergeant Ruiz had mentioned her research. Maybe Hale had said something during one of his closed-door meetings with senior staff. Or maybe it was simpler, maybe people just noticed the shift in dynamics and drew their own conclusions. Whatever the reason, the change was real. Officers who'd previously ignored me in the hallway now nodded. The junior enlisted staff started addressing me with a formality that felt less like protocol and more like respect. Someone had placed a new coffee mug on my desk one morning, Air Force blue ceramic with gold lettering, MAJE, Cross, Flight Medic, Echo Squadron. No note, no explanation. Just the mug, waiting when I arrived. I picked it up, felt its weight, read the inscription. The E stood for Elizabeth, my first name that nobody used. Someone had gone to effort here. This wasn't something you could order from the base exchange. This was custom, personal, intentional. I looked around the empty office, then at the mug again. After a moment, I filled it with coffee and returned to my work. When Captain Lee stopped by later, he glanced at the mug but didn't comment. His slight smile told me everything I needed to know about its origins. My replacement arrived 2 weeks before my departure, a Major Bradley Chin, fresh from a stateside hospital assignment and enthusiastic about transitioning to operational support. I spent those final weeks training him, explaining the systems and procedures, warning him about the personalities and politics. I didn't mention Hale's behavior directly, but I gave Chin the tools to recognize and document problems if they arose. "This seems like a good team," Chin said during one of our training sessions. "Colonel Hale seems fair, if a bit reserved." "He's learning," I said carefully. "Give him space to grow into better leadership. But don't accept disrespect as the cost of doing business." Chin nodded, understanding the unspoken context. Military officers develop a language for these conversations, ways of warning and protecting each other without technically violating the chain of command. My last day at Nellis was anticlimactic. No farewell party, no speeches. Just final paperwork, out processing appointments, and packing up my small office. The coffee mug went into my personal box, wrapped carefully in Air Force Times newspapers. Hale stopped by as I was finishing. He stood in the doorway, watching me pack. "You all set?" "Yes, sir. Major Chin is fully briefed. He'll do well here." "I'm sure he will." Hale paused. "I wanted to thank you for your service to this unit. I know the circumstances weren't ideal, but your work here was exemplary. The training documentation system you reorganized has already improved our inspection readiness significantly." It was a formal speech, the kind supervisors give when they need to acknowledge departure without addressing underlying tension. I appreciated the professionalism even as I recognized its limitations. "Thank you, sir. I'm grateful for the opportunity." He stepped into the office, lowered his voice. "I also wanted to say, what I learned from your file, it stayed with me. I've been thinking about leadership differently, about what it means to truly support the people under my command. I can't undo what I said, but I'm trying to do better going forward." "That's all any of us can do, sir." He extended his hand. I shook it. Then, for the first time since I'd known him, he saluted me first. It was technically unnecessary. We were indoors, in an informal setting, but the gesture carried meaning beyond protocol. Acknowledgement, respect, apology compressed into a single formal movement. I returned the salute, sharp and precise. Good luck at Fort Sam Houston, Major. Those medics are lucky to have you. Thank you, sir. He left, and I finished packing. The office looked bare now, impersonal, ready for Major Chin to fill with his own presence and priorities. That was how the military worked. People cycled through positions, each leaving small marks that faded quickly once they departed. Permanence was an illusion. Only the mission endured. I took one last look around, then carried my boxes to my car. The Nevada sun was brutal, turning the parking lot into a shimmering heat trap. I loaded everything into my trunk, then stood for a moment, looking back at the building. Sergeant Ruiz was coming out, heading toward her vehicle. When she saw me, she changed direction. Heading out, Major? All done. Starting terminal leave tomorrow. Fort Sam Houston is lucky to get you. She shifted her weight, looking like she wanted to say more but wasn't sure how. Finally, thank you for staying professional through everything. You showed us what that actually looks like. You don't need to thank me for doing my job, Sergeant. Maybe not, but I wanted to anyway. She saluted, crisp and formal. I returned it. I drove off Nellis for the last time that afternoon, my boxes stacked in the back, my new orders in the passenger seat. The reassignment meant a cross-country drive, Nevada to Texas, 3 days if I pushed it, for if I took my time. I decided to take my time. The drive gave me space to think, process, prepare. I listened to podcasts and audiobooks, stopped at roadside diners, stayed in anonymous highway motels. In New Mexico, I detoured to visit a former Echo Squadron member who'd retired near Albuquerque. We sat on his porch drinking beer, not talking about Afghanistan, just catching up on boring life details. It was exactly what I needed. Fort Sam Houston welcomed me with typical military efficiency in processing, briefings, facility tours. The Combat Medic Training Division was larger than I expected, training hundreds of medical personnel annually for all branches of service. My role would be overseeing curriculum development and mentoring senior instructors, particularly those preparing medics for deployment. My new commander, Colonel Whitaker, was a career medical officer with 2 decades of experience. She reviewed my file during our initial meeting, then looked at me with clear, direct eyes. I read your operational history. I also read the incident reports from Nellis, the ones Lieutenant Colonel Hale filed with his recommendation for your reassignment. He was surprisingly candid about his own failures. I hadn't known Hale had documented anything beyond the standard reassignment justification. Ma'am? He wrote that he created a hostile work environment based on ignorance and prejudice, and that your professionalism in the face of his behavior demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership character we need in training commands. Whitaker set down the tablet. He also requested that his evaluation include acknowledgement of his failures, to be documented in his permanent file. That's rare. Officers usually hide their mistakes, not volunteer them for the record. He was trying to do better, I said. Maybe. Or maybe he was trying to clear his conscience. Either way, you're here now, and I'm glad. We need people who understand that training medics isn't just about technical skills. It's about preparing them for moral weight, for the decisions that will haunt them afterward. You can teach that because you've lived it. She assigned me to a team of 6 senior instructors, all combat veterans from various conflicts. They welcomed me with the easy camaraderie of people who'd seen similar things, carried similar weight. No explanations needed, no justifications required. Field triage. But before we start with techniques and procedures, I want to talk about something more important. They leaned forward slightly, engaged. The hardest part of being a combat medic isn't the technical challenge. You'll learn the skills. They're difficult but learnable. The hardest part is living with your decisions afterward. Every choice you make downrange, every patient you treat or don't treat, every triage decision under fire, those stay with you. They become part of who you are. The room was silent. A few students glanced at each other. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what you're signing up for. This job will change you. It will show you things you can't unsee, ask you to do things you can't undo. And when you come home, most people won't understand. They'll thank you for your service and move on with their day, and you'll be standing there carrying weight they can't see and didn't know exists. A young airman in the front row, couldn't have been more than 19, raised her hand. So why do it? If it's that hard, why does anyone become a combat medic? I thought about Kandahar, about the 2 airmen I'd kept alive through that 13-hour nightmare. About the 4 I hadn't. About every decision I'd made under fire and whether different choices would have changed outcomes. Because someone has to, I said finally. Because when your teammates are bleeding out, they need someone who knows what to do and has the courage to do it. Because the alternative, watching people die from treatable injuries because nobody had the training or will to help them, that's worse than carrying the weight. At least this way, the weight means something. The class sat with that for a moment. Then we began the technical training, airways, circulation, hemorrhage control. The fundamentals that would someday save lives or haunt failures. After class, 3 students approached with questions. Not about technique, but about coping, about preparation, about what helped when the weight got too heavy. I answered honestly, sharing resources and strategies I'd learned through trial and error and mandatory therapy. Walking back to my office afterward, I felt something unfamiliar, usefulness. Not just competence or professionalism, but actual value. These students needed what I could teach them, and not just the medical protocols. They needed someone who'd been there, survived it, and could show them how to keep going afterward. Maybe that's what Hale had seen in his moment of clarity after viewing my file. Not just the trauma, but the resilience. Not just what broke me, but what I'd built from the broken pieces. That night, in my new base housing, I unpacked the coffee mug and placed it on my kitchen counter. Maj E. Cross, Flight Medic, Echo Squadron. I filled it with water and drank slowly, thinking about the young airman's question, why do it, and my answer. Because someone has to. Because the weight means something. Because sometimes the only way forward from your worst day is to help others prepare for theirs. The training command rhythm suited me. Days followed predictable patterns, morning instruction, afternoon practical exercises, evening planning for the next day's curriculum. The structure created safety, boundaries around the chaos that still lived in my head. My students progressed through their training cycles, each cohort bringing new personalities and challenges. Some were naturally gifted, instinctively understanding the balance between urgency and precision that field medicine required. Others struggled, had to learn through repetition and failure. I worked with all of them, adjusting my teaching to match their learning styles, finding ways to reach the ones who were struggling without leaving the advanced students unchallenged. 3 months into my assignment, I received a package. No return address, just a postmark from Nevada. Inside was a folded flight patch, the Echo Squadron insignia, the same one I'd worn on my flight suit in Kandahar. The fabric was faded, the edges frayed from use. Someone had worn this patch for a long time before sending it to me. A note accompanied it, written in careful block letters, for the ones who still stand. I turned the note over, looking for more information. Nothing. Just those 5 words. I sat at my kitchen table, holding the patch, running my thumb over the embroidered details. Echo Squadron had been disbanded after the mission that went wrong, too many casualties, too much negative attention. The surviving members had been reassigned to different units, scattered across the Air Force. I'd lost touch with most of them, though I knew Staff Sergeant Taylor, we called him Moose, was still recovering at Walter Reed. The patch could have come from any of them. Or from someone who'd never deployed with us, but understood what the insignia represented. The anonymity felt intentional, like the gesture mattered more than the recognition. I placed the patch on my dresser, next to my shadow box with its carefully arranged ribbons and medals. The official recognition of service and the unofficial acknowledgement of cost. Both mattered. Both told incomplete versions of the truth. At work, I integrated the lessons from my own experience into the curriculum. Not the graphic details, those served no purpose except trauma tourism, but the principles. How to maintain focus when everything around you is chaos. How to make triage decisions quickly enough to matter. How to live with the decisions afterward. One afternoon, a student named Lieutenant Jensen approached me after class. She was 25, newly commissioned, and struggling with the psychological aspects of the training. Major Cross, can I ask you something? Go ahead. How do you turn it off? The empathy, I mean. During the practical exercises, I keep thinking about the patients as real people, imagining their families, their lives. The instructors say I need to be more clinical, but I don't know how to just stop caring. I gestured for her to sit. We were in an empty classroom, afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. You don't turn it off, I said. The empathy is what makes you good at this job. The trick is learning to hold it alongside the clinical thinking, not replacing one with the other. But how? How do you care about someone and still cut into them, still make brutal decisions about their treatment? You remember that your empathy serves them better when it's paired with confidence. Caring about them means doing what they need, not what makes you feel better. Sometimes what they need is aggressive, painful, frightening. Your empathy doesn't disappear, it just gets expressed through effective medicine instead of gentle words. Jensen absorbed this, thinking, what about after? When you're not in the field anymore, when you have time to think about all the people you treated, then the empathy comes back full force and you deal with it. Therapy, support groups, whatever tools you need. But in the moment, you use it as fuel for precision. You care enough to get it right. She nodded slowly. Is that what you did? In Afghanistan. When it worked, yes. When it didn't. I paused, choosing words carefully. When it didn't, I had to learn to live with caring deeply about people I couldn't save. That's harder. That's the part nobody trains you for. How do you live with it? I thought about the question, the same one I'd asked myself countless times, in therapy offices and sleepless nights and quiet moments when the weight felt unbearable. You decide that their deaths mean something. You teach other medics, so maybe they'll save the patients you couldn't. You honor the ones you lost by becoming better, wiser, more capable. You carry them, but you don't let the weight stop you from moving forward. Jensen's eyes were bright, maybe with tears. Thank you for being honest. That's the only way I know how to teach this. She left, and I sat alone in the classroom for a while, thinking about honesty and what it cost. Being vulnerable with students meant reopening wounds that had barely scarred. Each time I shared my experience, I relived pieces of it. But the alternative, teaching sterile, detached medicine without acknowledging the human cost, would have been worse. That evening, I attended a support group on base for veterans with PTSD. I'd been going weekly since arriving at Fort Sam Houston, finding value in the shared understanding, the lack of explanation required. Tonight's topic was workplace challenges, how to navigate professional environments when your trauma made certain situations triggering or difficult. A Marine corporal talked about panic attacks during performance reviews. An Army sergeant described intrusive thoughts during staff meetings. I listened, recognizing my own experiences in their stories. When it was my turn, I talked about Hale. About the mockery, the casual cruelty, the moment when he'd accessed my file and everything changed. I talked about anger and forgiveness, about whether understanding someone's ignorance excused their behavior. I don't know if I've forgiven him, I said. Some days I think I have. Other days I'm still furious about what he said, how he treated me. Maybe forgiveness isn't a single decision, but something you have to choose repeatedly. The group facilitator, a clinical psychologist who specialized in combat trauma, nodded. Forgiveness isn't required for healing. Sometimes the healthiest thing is to acknowledge what happened, set boundaries, and move forward without reconciliation. But he apologized. He tried to make it right. And that matters. But it doesn't obligate you to forgive him on his timeline or in the way he might want. Your healing belongs to you, not to him. I carried that perspective home with me, turned it over in my mind. Maybe the point wasn't whether I forgave Hale, but whether I could build a life that didn't revolve around what he'd done. Whether I could let his behavior be a footnote in my story rather than a defining chapter. The weeks continued. My teaching improved as I found my rhythm, learned which examples resonated and which fell flat. The students responded well, their evaluation scores were high, and several specifically mentioned appreciating the psychological preparation alongside the technical training. Colonel Whitaker called me into her office one morning. I've been reviewing student feedback from your courses. Consistently excellent. Several students have specifically requested you as their mentor for advanced certifications. Thank you, ma'am. The students here are motivated. They make teaching easy. Don't undersell yourself, Major. Good students need good instructors to reach their potential. You're providing something valuable, not just technical knowledge, but wisdom about the psychological realities of this work. She pulled out a folder. I want to talk to you about expanding your role. We're developing a new program focused specifically on psychological resilience for combat medical personnel, training them not just to handle trauma, but to anticipate and prepare for it mentally. I'd like you to lead curriculum development. This was more than I'd expected, a chance to shape how the military prepared medics for the mental health aspects of their work, to potentially spare future medics some of the struggles I'd faced. I'd be honored, ma'am. Good. You'll be working with our psychiatric staff and some consultants from the VA. The goal is to create evidence-based training that actually prepares people for the psychological impact of combat medicine, rather than just telling them to be tough and figure it out. Exactly what I needed when I was younger, exactly what might have made the aftermath of Kandahar less devastating. When do we start? Next month. I'll send you the project details. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing with your current students. You're making a difference, Major. Don't doubt that. I left her office feeling something close to hope. Not the naive optimism of thinking everything would be fine, but the grounded hope of knowing my worst experiences could become tools for preventing others' suffering. That night, I drafted an email to Hale. Not to send. I'd learned that some communications were more about processing than actual connection, but to articulate my thoughts. I wrote about forgiveness and accountability, about how his apology mattered even if I wasn't sure I'd fully accepted it. I wrote about the work I was doing now, how his treatment of me had paradoxically reinforced my commitment to better leadership and support for struggling service members. I saved the draft, but didn't send it. Maybe someday I would. Maybe I wouldn't. The email's value was in the writing, not the sending. A week later, I received a call from Walter Reed. Staff Sergeant Moose Taylor had asked if I'd visit during my next leave period. I hadn't seen him since the mission, hadn't known how to bridge the gap between survivor's guilt and actual connection. But he was reaching out, and I owed him the effort. I arranged leave and flew to Maryland. The hospital was familiar in the way all military medical facilities were, the same efficient layout, the same antiseptic smell, the same mixture of hope and resignation in the hallways. Moose looked older, thinner, marked by this same mission that had marked me. But his smile when I entered was genuine, warm. Major Cross. Still don't know how to relax, I see. He gestured at my still military posture. Some habits die hard, Moose. We talked for hours. About the mission, finally giving voice to memories we'd both been carrying alone. About the ones we lost. About the impossible decisions we'd made and whether we'd make them differently now. About survival and what it cost. I sent you something, he said toward the end of my visit. Few months back. A patch. That was you. Figured you should have it. Echo Squadron might be disbanded, but what we did still matters. The people we saved, the ones we couldn't, they all matter. You should remember that. I never forget. I know. But there's remembering as burden and remembering as honor. I wanted you to have something that felt more like the second one. I understood then why the note had said for the ones who still stand. Not just the survivors, but the ones who kept going despite the weight, who found ways to make meaning from tragedy. Thank you, Moose. For the patch, for reaching out. For being someone who understands. That's what we do, right? We stand. Together when we can, alone when we have to. But we keep standing. I flew back to Texas carrying that conversation with me, a reminder that healing wasn't solitary. That connection with others who'd been through similar experiences could lighten the weight even when nothing could remove it entirely. Back at Fort Sam Houston, I threw myself into developing the resilience curriculum. Working with psychiatrists and veteran counselors, we created training modules that addressed moral injury, survivor's guilt, and the specific psychological challenges of combat medicine. We included peer support components, taught stress management techniques, normalized seeking help. It was the work I'd been moving toward without fully realizing it, turning my trauma into something protective, something that might spare others the worst of what I'd experienced. Lieutenant Jensen stopped by my office one afternoon, looking more confident than she had months earlier. Major, I wanted to let you know I passed my field certification. Top of my class. Congratulations, Lieutenant. You earned it. I wanted to thank you specifically. That conversation we had about empathy and clinical thinking, it changed how I approached everything. I stopped trying to turn off my feelings and learned to channel them instead. It made all the difference. After she left, I sat at my desk looking at the coffee mug, the Echo Squadron patch, the files for the resilience curriculum. Pieces of my journey from Kandahar to here, from broken to functional to actually helpful. The weight hadn't disappeared. It never would. But I'd learned to carry it differently, to transform it from pure burden into something that gave me purpose, connected me to others, let me contribute meaningfully to a mission larger than my own survival. Outside my window, students ran formation drills in the Texas heat. Young, eager, unaware of what they'd face when training became reality. But better prepared than previous generations, thanks to curriculum built on honest acknowledgement of costs rather than stoic denial. I pulled out my laptop and continued writing the resilience training modules, choosing words carefully, trying to prepare people for experiences I still struggled to articulate. It was difficult work, emotionally exhausting. But it mattered. And that made all the difference. 6 months into developing the resilience curriculum, we piloted it with a test group of 40 students. The training spanned 2 weeks, integrated into their existing medical instruction, but focusing specifically on psychological preparation for combat medicine's unique stresses. I co-taught with Dr. Sarah Martinez, a clinical psychologist who deployed as a behavioral health officer in Iraq. She brought clinical expertise. I brought lived experience. Together, we created something neither of us could have built alone. The students' response exceeded expectations. Post-training surveys showed significant improvements in their understanding of moral injury, stress management strategies, and willingness to seek help if needed. More importantly, they reported feeling more prepared for the psychological realities of their jobs. This should have been standard training decades ago, Dr. Martinez said as we reviewed the results. How many people suffered unnecessarily because we pretended psychological preparation wasn't important? Too many, I said. But at least we're changing it now. Colonel Whitaker agreed, approving expansion of the program to all combat medical training pipelines. Within a year, every medic trained at Fort Sam Houston would receive psychological resilience instruction alongside their technical education. It felt like victory, small but real. My personal life remained quiet, intentionally so. I dated occasionally, but kept relationships casual, not ready for the vulnerability that deeper connection required. My social circle consisted mainly of other veterans, people who understood the specific shape of military experience and didn't need everything explained. I attended my support group religiously, finding value in the consistency even when I had nothing new to share. Some weeks I talked, other weeks I listened. Both mattered. The nightmares decreased in frequency but never disappeared entirely. I'd learned to manage them, grounding techniques, breathing exercises, the mental tools that let me return to sleep after waking in panic. Progress, not perfection. I'd stopped expecting perfection. A year after leaving Nellis, I received an email from Captain Mason Lee. He'd been promoted to major and was working on a project about improving organizational culture in military medical units. He wanted to interview me about my experiences with toxic leadership and what systemic changes might prevent similar situations. We spoke on the phone for over an hour. I was candid about Hale's behavior, but also about his eventual accountability and growth. Toxic leadership wasn't just about individual failures, it was about systems that enabled those failures, cultures that prioritized hierarchy over humanity. What would have helped? Lee asked. If you could redesign the system, what safeguards would you implement? I thought about it. Mandatory leadership training that includes specific instruction on trauma, PTSD, and psychological injury. Anonymous reporting systems with actual teeth. Cultural shifts that reward leaders who support struggling personnel rather than mock them. And consequences for officers who create hostile environments, not just when it becomes documented and embarrassing, but proactively. That's ambitious. So is asking people to risk their lives for their country, then treating them like problems when they come home carrying the weight of that service. Lee was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, things changed at Nellis after you left. Hale's leadership style softened significantly. He implemented new protocols for supporting personnel with medical limitations, including mental health issues. He's not the same officer he was. Good. People should be allowed to grow. Do you forgive him? The question again. I'd been asked variations of it dozens of times by therapists, support group members, fellow veterans. Each time, my answer evolved slightly. I don't know if forgiveness is the right framework, I said slowly. He hurt me, apologized, and tried to make amends. I acknowledge all of that. But I don't owe him absolution, and he doesn't owe me continued penance. We both moved forward. That's enough. That's a healthy perspective. It took a long time to get here. After we hung up, I thought about Hale. Wondered if he still thought about our interactions, whether he carried guilt or had processed it and moved on. I hoped he'd moved on. Carrying unnecessary weight helped nobody. I'd learned that lesson hard, the difference between honoring the past and being imprisoned by it. The dead don't need us to suffer in their memory. They need us to live well, to make their sacrifice mean something through how we conduct ourselves afterward. 2 years into my assignment at Fort Sam Houston, I was promoted to lieutenant colonel. The promotion ceremony was small, professional. Colonel Whitaker administered the oath. A few colleagues attended. I felt proud of the achievement while recognizing it was just a milestone, not a destination. With the promotion came new responsibilities, overseeing the entire Combat Medical Training Division, not just my specific programs. More administrative work, less direct teaching. I missed the classroom but appreciated the broader impact I could have from the leadership position. I hired carefully, building a team of instructors who shared my commitment to honest, psychologically informed training. Veterans with combat medical experience, clinicians with deployment history, educators who understood that preparing people for war required acknowledging its costs. Together, we continued refining and expanding the curriculum. Added modules on traumatic grief, on moral injury specific to triage decisions, on maintaining professional boundaries while providing compassionate care. We brought in guest speakers, wounded veterans, family members of fallen service members, VA mental health specialists. The work was meaningful but emotionally taxing. Some days I left the office drained, feeling like I'd relived my own trauma a dozen times through teaching it. But the alternative, sterile, disconnected training that left medics unprepared, was worse. I learned to balance the emotional cost with self-care. Regular therapy, consistent exercise, maintaining boundaries between work and personal life. The basics of psychological health that I preached to students and had to practice myself. One afternoon, a new student approached me after class. Airman First Class Rivera, barely 20 years old, looked nervous but determined. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Did you ever regret becoming a medic? After everything you experienced, did you wish you'd chosen a different career?" I considered the question carefully. No, not once. What I experienced was terrible and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But being a medic meant I had the skills to save lives when it mattered most. That's not something I regret. But the cost is real. Significant. Ongoing. But so is the value. I saved 2 lives during that mission in Kandahar. Those 2 people are alive today because I knew what to do and had the courage to do it under impossible circumstances. That's not nothing. Rivera absorbed this. How do you know if you're strong enough for this job? You don't know until you're tested. And even then, strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about breaking and finding ways to keep functioning anyway. About asking for help when you need it. About acknowledging the weight while refusing to be crushed by it. That sounds hard. It is. But you're asking the right questions, which suggests you're taking this seriously. That's a good start. After Rivera left, I sat alone thinking about strength and what it meant. I'd spent years believing strength meant stoicism, meant carrying weight silently, meant never showing vulnerability. The military had reinforced that belief at every level. But real strength, I'd learned, was more complicated. It was knowing when to push through and when to ask for help. when to carry weight alone and when to share it, when to honor trauma's impact and when to refuse to let it dictate your future. I'd been strong the day everything went wrong in Kandahar, kept functioning under fire, made brutal triage decisions, saved who I could. But I'd also been strong afterward, when I sought therapy, acknowledged my PTSD, learned coping strategies, and rebuilt a life that included both the trauma and recovery from it. Both mattered. Both were necessary. That evening, I attended a promotion ceremony for several of my former students, now finishing their training and receiving their first duty assignments. Watching them accept their new responsibilities, I felt a mixture of pride and concern. Pride in their achievement, concern for what they'd face. At the reception afterward, Lieutenant Jensen, now preparing for deployment, pulled me aside. "I wanted to tell you before I left," she said. "This training saved my life before I even needed saving. I feel prepared in ways I wouldn't have without your honesty about the psychological realities. Thank you for that. Stay safe out there, Lieutenant. Remember everything you learned, and don't hesitate to use the support systems when you need them." "I won't. You taught me that asking for help is part of being professional, not a weakness." After she left, I stood on the building steps watching the sunset over Fort Sam Houston. Somewhere, young medics were preparing for deployment. Somewhere, others were in combat, making life-and-death decisions. Somewhere, veterans were struggling with the aftermath. The cycle continued, eternal and necessary. But maybe, incrementally, we were making it more survivable. Better training, better support, better acknowledgement of costs. Not perfect, not painless, but better. I thought about the arc from Kandahar to Nellis to here. From trauma to mockery to purpose. From breaking to surviving to actually thriving in a qualified, complicated way. The journey wasn't linear. Some days I still struggled, still felt the weight of every decision I'd made in that firefight, still woke from nightmares covered in phantom blood. But I'd built something meaningful from the broken pieces. A career that honored what I'd lost while protecting others from similar loss. Teaching that prepared people honestly rather than pretending war was clean or psychologically simple. Leadership that valued vulnerability alongside competence. The coffee mug sat on my office desk. The Echo Squadron patch hung in my shadow box. Physical reminders of where I'd been, what I'd survived, who I'd become in the aftermath. For the ones who still stand. I was standing. Some days barely, some days strongly, but always standing. Moving forward, carrying weight, finding ways to make it mean something. That was enough. That was victory, qualified and complicated but real. The mission continued. And so did I. 3 years after the Kandahar mission, I stood at a podium facing 200 graduates of the Combat Medical Training Program. Their faces reflected the mixture of pride and apprehension I remembered from my own graduation years ago, ready to serve, uncertain what that service would require. Colonel Whitaker had asked me to deliver the commencement address. I'd agreed, then spent weeks crafting and revising, trying to find words that were honest without being discouraging, realistic without being traumatic. The auditorium was full, graduates in dress uniforms, families in their best clothes, instructors and administrative staff filling the back rows. The ceremony had included awards, recognitions, the formal conferring of certifications. Now came my part. I adjusted the microphone and looked out at the audience. Somewhere in those faces were future versions of myself, people who'd face impossible choices, carry unbearable weight, question whether they were strong enough. I couldn't protect them from that. But maybe I could prepare them. Distinguished guests, faculty, families, and most importantly, graduates, congratulations. You've completed one of the most demanding training programs in military medicine. You've demonstrated competence, commitment, and courage. You should be proud. I paused, let them absorb the praise. They'd earned it. But I'm not here to tell you that training was the hard part. I'm here to tell you the truth about what comes next. The room's energy shifted slightly, attention sharpening, uncertainty creeping in. Some of you will deploy to combat zones. Some will serve in medical facilities supporting wounded warriors. Others will work in training commands or research positions. Wherever you serve, you'll face challenges that test not just your technical skills, but your psychological resilience, your moral foundation, your sense of who you are. I glanced down at my notes, though I'd memorized the speech. The paper was just security, something to hold. People think war ends when you come home. They imagine that survival equals success, that making it through deployment means you've won. But the truth is more complicated. Sometimes the real battle starts after you've left the combat zone, when you're standing in an office or a hospital or your own living room, carrying weight that no one else can see. A few graduates shifted in their seats. This wasn't the inspiring rhetoric they'd expected. I deployed to Kandahar province as a flight surgeon attached to Echo Squadron. I was responsible for medical support during a pilot extraction that turned into a 13-hour firefight. Our aircraft went down. I lost 4 teammates that day. I kept 2 others alive using 1 working radio and whatever medical supplies survived the crash. The room was completely silent now. Even the families who'd come expecting celebration were leaning forward. I did my job. I made the right decisions under impossible circumstances. I saved who I could save. And for years afterward, I woke up at 3 in the morning wondering if different choices would have changed outcomes. Wondering if I'd missed something, if I could have done more, if those 4 deaths were somehow my fault even though every rational analysis said they weren't. I looked directly at the graduates. That's moral injury. That's what happens when you're asked to make life and death decisions in conditions where perfect outcomes are impossible. You do your best, and it's not enough, and you carry that knowledge forever. A mother in the 3rd row was crying quietly. I pressed on. I'm not telling you this to frighten you or discourage you. I'm telling you because you deserve honesty. This job will cost you something. It will change you in ways you can't predict or prevent. And when you come home, you'll encounter people who don't understand that cost, who think PTSD is weakness, who mock psychological injury because they've never experienced it. I thought about Hale, about that morning meeting, about every dismissive comment and cruel joke. When that happens, and it will happen, I want you to remember something. Your trauma is not weakness. Your pain is not failure. The fact that you're hurting means you cared deeply enough about your patients and your mission to be wounded when things went wrong. That's not a flaw. That's proof of your humanity, your compassion, your suitability for this work. Several graduates were nodding. Good. They were hearing me. Silence, respect, and understanding are medals no one hands out. You earn them through how you treat the people who've already fought enough. When you encounter colleagues who are struggling, remember this moment. Remember that trauma is an injury, not a choice. Remember that asking for help is courage, not weakness. I paused, taking a breath before the final section. You're about to join a profession that will ask everything from you: your skill, your courage, your sleep, your peace of mind, sometimes your sense of who you are. You'll see things you can't unsee, lose people you couldn't save, make decisions that will haunt you. That's not a failure of the system or of you. That's the nature of combat medicine. The auditorium felt heavy with truth, the celebratory atmosphere replaced by something more somber, but perhaps more valuable. But here's what I want you to know, what I wish someone had told me before I deployed: you're not alone in this. Every person in this auditorium who's worn a medical insignia downrange carries similar weight. We understand. And we're here, in support groups, in therapy, in quiet conversations over coffee, ready to help you carry what you can't carry alone. I thought about Dr. Martinez, about Moose, about every veteran who'd shared their story and made space for mine. The people you'll save will never know the cost of their survival. They won't know about the nightmares you'll have, the therapy you'll need, the relationships that will strain under the weight you're carrying. That's okay. They don't need to know. But you need to know that the cost is worth it. Every life you save, every patient you stabilize, every person who to use that competence ethically, the courage to ask for help when you need it, and the compassion to support others who are struggling. Final pause. Thank you for your willingness to serve. Thank you for choosing this difficult, necessary work. And thank you for listening to an old veteran tell you the truth instead of comfortable lies. You deserve honesty. Our patients deserve your prepared excellence. And you deserve support as you navigate the costs of providing that excellence. I stepped back from the podium. The applause started slowly, then built, Graduates, families, faculty all standing. But it wasn't the enthusiastic celebration typical of these ceremonies. It was something more thoughtful, more weighted with understanding. Colonel Whitaker shook my hand as I returned to my seat. "That was perfect," she said quietly. "Exactly what they needed to hear." After the ceremony, graduates and families approached me. Some thanked me for the honesty. Others shared their own concerns about deployment. A few parents asked about resources for supporting their children after they returned from combat zones. I answered each question carefully, providing information, offering perspective, being as honest as I'd been from the podium. This was part of the mission too, educating not just service members, but the communities they'd return to, helping build support systems that could sustain people through the aftermath of trauma. Lieutenant Jensen, deploying in 2 weeks, found me as I was leaving. "That speech," she said. "That's exactly what I needed to hear before I go. Not false promises that everything will be fine, but honest acknowledgement that it will be hard and that resources exist to help me through it. Remember what you learned here, Lieutenant. Use it. And come home safe." "I will. And ma'am, thank you. For everything. For being honest, for showing us what recovery looks like, for building these programs. You've made a difference." After she left, I walked across the base toward my car. The Texas evening was warm, the sky shifting from blue to orange as the sun descended. Around me, the base continued its rhythms, aircraft landing and departing, personnel changing shifts, the endless cycle of military operations. I thought about the speech, about whether I'd been too honest, whether graduates needed hope more than truth. But no, they needed both. False hope that ignored reality would fail them when they faced actual combat. Realistic preparation, paired with genuine support systems, gave them better chances of surviving not just physically but psychologically. That was the mission I'd found after Kandahar, after Nellis, after all the breaking and rebuilding. Not to pretend trauma didn't exist, but to prepare people for it and support them through it. To transform my worst experiences into protection for others. In my car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. The Echo Squadron patch hung from my rearview mirror now, moved from my shadow box to somewhere I'd see it daily. A reminder of what I'd survived, who I'd lost, why this work mattered. For the ones who still stand. I was standing. Stronger than I'd been at Nellis, wiser than I'd been in Kandahar, more purposeful than I'd ever been. The weight hadn't disappeared, it never would. But I'd learned to carry it differently, to transform it from pure burden into something that gave meaning to my survival. The nightmares still came sometimes. The therapy continued. Some days were harder than others. But I'd built a life that included the trauma without being defined by it, that honored what I'd lost while moving toward what I could still accomplish. That was victory, not perfect recovery, not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose alongside the struggle. Integration rather than erasure. Honoring the past while building a future. I started the engine and drove home through the gathering dusk. Tomorrow would bring new classes, new students, new opportunities to turn painful experience into protective wisdom. The mission continued, and so did I. Not because I'd healed completely, I wasn't sure that was possible or even necessary. But because I'd learned to function effectively while carrying weight, to find meaning in the struggle, to use my trauma as a bridge to helping others rather than a wall that isolated me. Some people needed to see the file to believe. Others didn't need to. The graduates I'd just addressed were the second kind people who listened when someone told them the truth, who understood that trauma was real without needing to witness it firsthand, who would support their colleagues without waiting for crisis to prove the need. I'd helped create that. Through my teaching, my curriculum development, my willingness to be vulnerable about my own struggles. I'd contributed to changing military culture incrementally, making space for honest acknowledgement of psychological injury alongside celebration of resilience. That was legacy. That was purpose. That was how I transformed the worst day of my life into something that might prevent others from experiencing similar devastation unprepared. At home, I poured water into the Echo Squadron coffee mug and sat on my porch watching the evening settle. The Texas landscape was different from Afghanistan's, greener, less harsh, empty of threat. But the sky was the same vast expanse, the stars beginning to emerge the same distant lights. Somewhere out there, former students were serving. Lieutenant Jensen preparing for deployment. Airman Rivera mastering advanced techniques. Hundreds of graduates carrying my lessons into their careers, hopefully better prepared for what they'd face. I couldn't protect them from trauma, but I'd given them tools to survive it, permission to ask for help, understanding that struggling didn't mean failing. That had to be enough. And most days, it was. I finished the water and went inside. Tomorrow would come, with its classes and responsibilities and opportunities to make a difference. Tonight, I just needed to rest, to sit with the quiet satisfaction of a mission completed and the ongoing commitment to keep standing, keep serving, keep transforming pain into purpose. The cycle continued. The mission endured. And I was here, still standing, still fighting, still finding ways to honor what I'd lost by protecting others from similar loss. For the ones who still stand. I stood. Imperfectly, with support, carrying weight, but standing nonetheless. And that was enough. Here's where I'll leave it. If you've ever had a boss cross the line, drop your story below. How did you respond, and what changed after? Do you think an apology is enough, or does accountability require action and documentation? Have you seen PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, mocked or minimized at work, and how did your team handle it? If this resonated, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs backup today. Your turn. What would you have done the morning after he saw the file?